Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And it will compensate us for the time spent on evening and weekend administrative burdens.
A new deal for family doctors in BC.
We need to make sure that we are investing in our communities.
What it means for physicians and patients. Also, outgoing mayor in court. Doug McCallum's trial begins on a charge of public mischief. And
so it's a natural pest control.
The battle to save bats in BC.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away this week. Some major changes are set to be coming for family doctors in BC. A new payment model meant to compensate them for office costs and after-work administration. Mira Bain says more on the deal and what it means for the many British Columbians who don't have a family physician.
I think an immediate sigh of relief, which I'm hearing from many of my colleagues.
Doctors of BC President Dr. Ramneek Dosanjh says the new deal for family physicians is the best in Canada.
Addressing the overhead and the rising costs of business is a major one in this new payment model.
At the heart of it is a new compensation model which pays family doctors more.
This payment model for family doctors will help protect and strengthen BC's healthcare system by helping to attract new family doctors and retain existing doctors.
Under the fee-for-service system, which compensates doctors per visit, a family doctor makes an average of $250,000 a year. In that amount, the province estimates they also pay $80,000 to $85,000 a year in operating costs. Details are emerging, but the new payment model would see family physicians able to earn about $385,000 a year. Health Minister Adrian Dix says family physicians can choose to leave the current fee-for-service system in February for the new payment model and expects many will. This family physician and UBC professor says the new model is attractive for people wanting to work a little longer and new doctors.
I'm also hopeful that people moving to the province or new graduates are going to be interested enough in this new model that they'll say, hey, I'd like to go and join a practice and offer a bit of new capacity or fill in for somebody who's retiring.
Still, about 1 million people in BC don't have a family doctor. There are questions over how the government plans to measure outcomes.
I am relieved that there is a step in the right direction, but again, we want to see more detail, timelines, metrics, and measurement.
She questions how patients will be matched up with doctors as capacity in the system increases.
I certainly will be looking for the capacity side of this. Does it give people a way to find out where they can be attached to a family physician?
Doctors will vote on whether to ratify the new deal in the next few weeks. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
BC teachers, meanwhile, could also see their paychecks increase soon. After 6 months of negotiations, a tentative deal has been reached that would take effect by the end of this year. The teachers' old agreement expired in June. The CBC's Zara Premji joins us now with more. Zara, how are teachers reacting to this?
Dan, details around this deal are limited, but still teachers tell me anticipation is high. While it's a tentative agreement, the BC Teachers Federation tells CBC if ratified, this will take teachers in BC from near the lowest paid in the country into the top tier. The BCTF says new members could see anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 more in their annual salary. And for teachers at the top of their grids, they could see their salary jump anywhere from $10,000 to $13,000, tipping some across $100,000 a year line.
But, more and more people are using the food banks. This is something affecting teachers as well. So that salary increase cannot come soon enough because many of us are drowning in terms of what we make and just the reality of life here in the Lower Mainland.
Zara, was pay the only issue here?
While salary was a big part of the discussion, the BCTF says there were a few other important gains, including extra time for elementary teacher and their preparations, enhanced maternity leave, and improving counseling benefits, among other things. Now, both the BCTF and the BC Public School Employers Association will be casting their ballots on this deal in the coming weeks. Now, Ohana says this is only the first step if the province wants to retain teachers during this very difficult time of teacher shortages. Dan.
Zara Premji, thanks very much. Outgoing Surrey Mayor Doug McCallum's public mischief trial kicked off today. He's accused of lying to police after he claimed a political opponent ran over his foot. As Eva Yuguen-Senge reports, the woman who McCallum accused was the first witness.
Debbie Johnstone is one of two central figures in Doug McCallum's public mischief trial, the other being Doug McCallum himself. Today, 66-year-old Johnstone took the stand and stared directly at McCallum as she testified. McCallum claims she ran over his foot in a Save-On-Foods parking lot last year. Johnstone says she was there to collect signatures for a petition in opposition to McCallum's plans for a municipal police force. She says she shouted at him to resign. He came over to her passenger window and they had a heated, profane exchange that included her calling him scaly-faced and evil. She testified he called her a loudmouth, after which she drove away, not feeling anything unusual about her car. But the Crown says McCallum later called RCMP and claimed that Johnstone hit him, and he allegedly said, quote, "I want to go after her." Johnstone says police told her she was being investigated for criminal harassment and assault with a weapon. Prosecutors played some of the footage from the Save-On-Foods parking lot to Johnstone during the trial. It appeared to show McCallum walking away after Johnstone drove away in the parking lot with no apparent sign of a limp. The Crown says the question at the heart of this trial is whether or not McCallum lied with the intent of having Johnstone charged with an offense. In cross-examination, McCallum's lawyer Richard Peck focused on Johnstone's history of attending protests in Surrey, playing her a clip of her shouting at a protest at Surrey RCMP headquarters. Peck asked about Johnstone's relationship with McCallum prior to the incident. She said she voted for him in 2018, but grew to dislike his policies and felt her voice wasn't being heard. She says she'll have more to say after the trial is over.
I've been asked to respect the court process, which is what I'm going to do. I've never done this before. And while I am able to speak right now, and I would love to tell you all my story, I am going to respect the court process, and I'm going to wait until the court is finished.
The scene outside the courthouse was just as colorful as inside. One person wore a monster mask and held up a sign reading, "Lock him up." The trial is expected to last 7 days. It's unclear whether McCallum will take the stand. Eva Yuguen-Senge, CBC News, Surrey.
BC's Public Safety Minister says police will be out in full force on this Halloween night to ensure there isn't a repeat of weekend violence seen in Vancouver.
Well, what we've seen is around Halloween is, drunken morons, to put it bluntly, who've had too much to drink, getting into fights with each other, and that's what we've seen on Halloween, and the police are going to be out in full force, and we'll have zero tolerance for that kind of behavior.
Police are searching for suspects after two separate incidents that left 5 people with stab wounds over the weekend. The VPD says 3 people were wounded in one fight near Oak and Broadway. The victims were all men in their 20s from White Rock. Less than an hour later, there was a second incident on Granville Street that left 2 people with knife wounds. None of their injuries, though, are believed to be life-threatening. Meanwhile, a public notification has just been issued for a high-risk violent sex offender who plans to live in Metro Vancouver. Take a look. Authorities say Dan Deacon is white, 6 feet tall. He weighs about 284 pounds and has gray hair and brown eyes. He has a lengthy criminal history dating back to 1988 that includes convictions for sexual offenses. The province warns he poses a significant risk of offending against boys under the age of 16. He's subject to monitoring and conditions like he cannot own or possess any weapons, and he can't go to any public places where anyone 16 or younger might be, among other things. Some good news for local soccer fans eager to gather together to watch the Men's World Cup in November. The province's bars and restaurants can temporarily extend their hours from November 20th to December 18th since host nation Qatar is 10 hours ahead. Keep in mind, pubs and eateries cannot serve booze any longer than they normally do, but customers will be able to get non-alcoholic drinks. The government says it's also a way to help those eateries recover during the pandemic. The province expanded hospitality hours during the 2010 Winter Olympics and the 2015 Rugby World Cup. Families and kids at BC Children's Hospital did not miss out on trick-or-treating today. Halloween was brought to them.
Celebrations and traditions are absolutely critical. Should a child and family wish to participate? Should they typically participate? Joyful experiences, laughter, fun, music, celebrations are critical to a child on a healthcare journey. It really lends to the overall state of well-being.
McKillop says about 1,500 kids got to enjoy some Halloween festivities today, thanks to the staff, the volunteers, and the donors. Trick-or-treat stations were set up throughout the hospital for all kids wanting to dress up and get some treats. The hospital has been running similar events for the past 6 years. Kuljeet Kaila is here for our first check on the weather. Always nice to see everybody be able to have a treat or two.
Absolutely, and happy Halloween to everyone. Trick-or-treating hours underway right now, looking pretty good out there. The rain did hold off quite nicely today. We were expecting about a 30 to 40% chance in some parts of the Lower Mainland. I didn't really quite see it, but what we will see later on this week is another low-pressure system moving in for the South Coast and for the Central Coast, and this is going to bring another rainfall for Thursday and Friday. Quite a bit of rain actually coming, and then it'll take a bit of a break on Saturday, return again on Sunday. So this is what we can expect outside right now. In terms of temperatures, you do want to bundle up if you are heading out. Only 8 degrees in Vancouver, 9 degrees in Pitt Meadow, so we're below the double digits for the first time in a while. This is what your week ahead looks like. Windy tomorrow, clear and calm for Wednesday. It's a great day to get outside, and then that rain returns on Thursday with an 80% risk, up to 40 millimeters of rain by Friday. And your daily highs across the Lower Mainland and across British Columbia are going to start to sink. Temperature drops big time happening across the board, including Fort Nelson, minus 6 to 16 and 9 degrees down to 3 by the end of the week in Revelstoke. So it's going to start getting quite chilly. We saw the sunset just before 6, rising at 8 o'clock tomorrow at 8 degrees, and maybe light showers and then sunshine for the rest of Tuesday. Dan, I'll have your 7-day forecast coming up.
That sounds good. Thanks, Kuljeet. To other news now, the Katzie First Nation is suing BC Hydro and the province for allegedly breaching legal commitments to mitigate damage caused by the Alouette hydroelectric dam. The nation claims the dam has destroyed salmon habitat and caused damage to the nation's traditional territories. The Katzie won a declaration that either Hydro or the province failed to fulfill the obligations laid out in the initial contract and is liable to make good on them. If that order isn't granted, the Katzie are calling for general, aggravated, and punitive damages or a share of the revenue generated by the power stations on the Alouette River. With inflation driving up everyday costs for all sorts of people, an Alberta dentist has come to BC to open up a clinic, one that's offering discounted dental services. Yasmin Gandam has more on what's driving him to charge 15% less.
I'm seeing a lot of people that haven't been to the dentist in 10 years.
For Dr. Ryan, reaching as many people as possible is important to him, including those without insurance who are forced to pay out of pocket.
I think people just want something to be less, so I'm happy to be that.
His patients are happy to have services offered at a discount, especially at a time when the cost of living is higher than ever.
I've been living in Vancouver for a year and a half. I don't have medical insurance. I'm paying from my own pocket, so it's important, to have an idea how much you're going to pay.
This 15% off helped me save so I can afford to put that money into other things instead of worrying if I'm going to be able to afford anything else now after just paying to get my teeth pulled out.
Dr. is pushing for public health care to be extended to include dental care as well.
See, I believe that dental care, your mouth is part of the body, so it's part of healthcare. In an ideal world, we would have universal dental care.
The Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association agrees, saying failing to deal with dental issues can result in serious infections.
There are a lot of Canadians who don't have access to proper dental care coverage at all. And in fact, about a third of Canadians report that they don't have any dental coverage.
Bill C-31 includes a new dental care benefit and has passed the final reading this week, heading to the Senate before Canadians can apply.
It's going to benefit about 500,000 kids under the age of 12 right away. And then the program is going to be expanded over the next couple of years. And pretty soon, Canadians will be able to apply if they qualify for roughly about $1,300 in dental care coverage over the next 2 years.
For now, clinics like Dr. help ease some of the burden. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Vancouver.
Bears, as we know, are a big part of the BC landscape, literally and figuratively, but living near and around them can be a challenge. Between last year and now, conservation officers killed 500 black bears in this province, sometimes leaving orphaned cubs to fend for themselves. But a shelter in Smithers takes care of those abandoned animals. Radio-Canada video producer Camille Vernet was there to see a rescue.
Angelica Langen is on the move.
I'm going up to Houston. Possible orphan bear cub.
Up in a tree, a bear cub is in trouble.
We're going to try to get it tranquilized and capture it, because obviously for some reason it's orphaned. Just a patience game. He's just out of reach of our equipment. If we don't get them to the shelter at this time of year, they have no chances. They die. It's incredibly hard to walk away, yeah, because you don't know if you get another chance.
After a stressful wait, they managed to sedate the cub.
We're both super happy that we were able to get her.
At the shelter, the team identifies the orphans.
We keep them as natural as possible, even with feeding, so feeding natural foods as much as we can, and with minimum human contact. They usually just have contact with their caretakers and nobody else.
Bears will spend a year in their care and then be released back into the wild.
These big traps we use to release grizzly bears.
In 2007, the nonprofit tried the same experiment with grizzly bears.
The aim is to prove that you can rewild a grizzly bear just as well as you can do a black bear. We definitely had to adapt our way of dealing with them. They're way more intelligent than the black bears are. I think we're getting a pretty good handle on it. It gets better every year, and the bears seem to be coping better out there.
Clayton Lamb studies human and grizzly bear coexistence across the province.
When you rehabilitate cubs, it's an incredibly resource-intensive endeavor that has varied success.
He says more can be done to prevent grizzly bear death in the first place.
By the time people get their attractants electric fenced or they spend more time in the wild with bear spray, I think that that feeling of coexistence can, be greatly increased because people, they have less problems with bears.
In much of BC, finding a bear in your backyard isn't at all that unusual.
That's what you get when you live in their neighborhood. They're neighbors, like I always say, like, oh, the neighbor just walked through the yard, and then it's the bear with the tiny cub.
She says the shelter is not meant to be a solution to conflicts.
It's better that they stay with their mom. People just take ownership of their property and secure their attractants.
This year, 71 bears and 5 grizzlies will be released. That's almost double the number they had the year before, and speaks to the challenge of education.
Because people are not managing their attractants and there's more bears in the area, so there's a higher chance of accidents and so on, because bears are moving away from each other, because territories get smaller.
These bears are ready to return to nature.
To get animals in that are orphaned or sick or tiny or emaciated, bring them back to a good health, and then see them go back into the wild where they belong. That's amazing. That's the most rewarding feeling I can imagine.
But true success for this organization is not being needed in the first place. Camille Vernet, Radio-Canada, Smithers.
Across the province tonight, is it trick or treat? But how much sugar is too much? Up next, Dr. Melissa Lim will break down the science driving those sugar cravings and have some advice on how to manage your candy intake this Halloween and your kids. And hello to everyone watching on our commercial-free live stream tonight. Halloween is here, as we know, but for a few businesses in Regina, it's spooky season year-round.
My wife and I have both been the fan of kind of skulls and weird items. We've also been collectors of like action figures and different things like that. We carry all range of things, horror, just anything weird, and we also have pop culture kind of items as well, pro wrestling. Most people that come here are very happy that Regina finally has a store like this. We don't hate it when people call us a Halloween store, but I prefer to be called a weird store. The most reaction that I have is that this is the greatest store ever, and I have a lot of repeat customers that come in, and I've met so many awesome people, like just through the store alone, and that just makes me so happy right there. So.
Actually, what got me into magic was a trip to Salem, Massachusetts over October and Halloween a few years ago. I attended a seance there, and the medium relayed a message to me about my recently departed grandma, and I thought that was the coolest, and I just wanted to explore more. Well, it's full of clothing, accessories, artwork that I design and print myself. I also share space with the Broom Closet Witchcraft Supply Shop. So you'll find herbs, incense, candles, all things you can use in spell work or manifesting. Halloween is a special time for witches because it's the new year. It's also called Samhain. So it's the end of harvest, the beginning of winter, kind of a time for new beginnings, and it's a time when the veil between our world and the spirit world is at its thinnest. Billy's one of my favorite things. He's our employee of the month. Billy is a character from Hocus Pocus, and I saw that movie when I was 9 years old, and it was mind-blowing for me. It was one of my first introductions to witches, so pretty special for me. People come in here for magical supplies all year long.
Well, does it work?
Of course, 100%.
Well, it is Halloween, and kids across BC are getting gussied up and heading out onto the streets in spooky attire for the free candy. But caregivers need to stay alert to make sure the night only brings pretend scares. Fraser Health is reminding parents and guardians to make sure kids stay visible out on the roads and sidewalks and to wear reflectors, flashlights, and glow sticks. Caregivers also need to check treats before anyone eats anything and toss out anything with unsealed or suspicious-looking wrappers. So once the kids come home with their Halloween bounty, how do we make sure little stomachs don't get the big tummy aches with all of that sugar? For insight, we're joined by Dr. Melissa Lem. She is a family doctor and clinical assistant professor at UBC. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks.
We know lots of sugar coming into the house, pillowcases full of good stuff that kids love. Are there guidelines on how much candy, sugar, little and older kids actually ought to have?
There are guidelines, and they come from Diabetes Canada. So it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're an adult or a kid. They say that no more than 10% of your total daily calories should come from sugar, and preferably 5%. So it's a little difficult, though, because kids' caloric intakes vary, whether you're a toddler or a teenager. So there are two guidelines I'm going to share that will make it pretty easy for parents. Number one, if you're under 2 years old, you're not supposed to have any added sugar in your diet. So, you know, those 18-monthers, don't be feeding them Halloween candy. And then also the American Heart Association came out with guidelines in 2016 that said every kid up to 18 should have maximum 25 grams of sugar per day. So when you think about it, those little Halloween-sized chocolate bars, those have about 7 to 8 grams of sugar in them. And so 3 of those, you're actually getting to your daily sugar intake recommendation.
And we know that it can be a challenge for caregivers, parents to manage this. What do you tell patients around managing kids' sugar intake and maybe bringing them into the process?
It can be tricky because sugary foods are so wrapped up into so many positive cultural and event associations. There's birthday cakes, Halloween candy, holiday cooking, Easter eggs. You know, it's just we're being overloaded with sugar and positivity when it comes to that. But the thing is, there is a role for sugar in our lives, and we have to remember that we need to view it as a treat, not as a core component of our everyday intake. So there's some advice that I can give you. One of it is don't completely restrict sugar in your kids, because if it's something that's totally taboo, they're going to obsess about it, they're going to crave it, and they're going to reach for it when you're not around and when they grow up. Number two, don't use it as a reward. If you start to set sugary foods on a pedestal above other kinds of foods, again, kids are going to value it more than other more nutritious foods. And then third, model healthy sugar intake yourself. So don't overconsume. But if you do have a treat, you can eat it in front of your kid. Let them see you eating that in moderation. Maybe share some with them if you want to. And then also let them see you eating lots of other healthy foods too.
Good advice. But obviously a challenge on a particular night like this when there's so much around. Want to pivot to the other large story of the day, the new payment plan that's coming in for doctors across BC. Some major changes in this plan. What difference will this make, for example, in your practice specifically?
I think it'll make a huge difference. And so just to be clear, we haven't ratified it yet. We're going to vote on it in February. My sense is probably my colleagues will be happy about it because it really rewards relationship-based, community-based longitudinal care. And this is something that's been overlooked in funding schedules and funding payments for a long time. So I think we're going to see more of my colleagues shifting into longitudinal family medicine. In my case, I tend to spend more time with my patients than a lot of other physicians. I don't have this really high kind of turnover rate in terms of patients per hour. And the nice thing about this agreement is that it actually pays you for hours and admin time too, because I spend a good hour, hour and a half sometimes after my day is done, and at home sometimes working on lab work and documentation and charting. And so this new agreement actually pays physicians for that kind of thing, which a lot of us have been asking for.
And lastly, though, what difference will this make, for example, for patients who don't have a family physician? Do you think more doctors will take on more patients?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of the physicians who've been working in other areas, like, for example, hospital-based care or high-volume walk-in care, for example, because they'll see that it's equally compensated, they're going to start shifting into longitudinal care. So those 1 million British Columbians who don't have a family doctor, I think in the new year and ongoing are going to start to see more physicians to be attached to and better overall care, which will trickle down into the healthcare system and reduce costs overall. So I'm a big fan of this announcement.
Dr. Melissa Lim, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Search and rescue efforts continue in Morbi, India, after Sunday's deadly bridge collapse that killed at least 134 people. More on the investigation and arrests after this.
The National with George McLean.
The road is still out between Vancouver and Squamish, 100 kilometers to the north. In both places and in between, hundreds of residents are cleaning up after floods caused by heavy rains. Genevieve Westcott reports.
For the people of Squamish, it's the second time in less than a year that heavy rains and severe flooding have devastated their homes. Last Boxing Day, hundreds of residents were forced to flee because of torrential rains. This weekend, the horrified people watched it happen all over again.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see if the government's going to help again this year.
Did the government help you out last year?
Oh, yes. You see, we lost everything last year. We weren't prepared at all, but we helped out. We paid for everything. Clothes, fridges, freezers, and everything.
Promises of provincial relief funds to compensate them for their million-dollar losses are little comfort to people like the Andrews. They say reimbursement takes months and is often insufficient. When Bob Ward bought his home 7 years ago, nobody told him it was sitting square on the floodplains. He's angry that developers were allowed to build here in the first place. Now he says he can't afford to move. Do you think you'll continue to live here in light of what's happened the last 2 years? Why is that?
I can't just walk out on it, can I? I could raise it, I guess, but I don't know.
The town itself is particularly susceptible to flooding because of high tides in Howe Sound and the melting snow in nearby mountains. Many residents suggest the effects of the rains could have been lessened had the government completed diking along the banks of the rivers. The town's merchants say they're running short of food and fuel. Rail and road links to Squamish were severed by washouts. Crews are working frantically to repair a washout at Furry Creek, which lies about 15 kilometers north of M Creek, scene of last week's tragedy which saw a mudslide wash out the bridge, leaving 5 people dead and 4 others missing. Genevieve Westcott, CBC News, Squamish.
One person is dead and another is in hospital following a shooting in front of an East Toronto high school. Police responded to reports of a shooting at Woburn Collegiate Institute around 3:30 this afternoon. One male victim was pronounced dead in hospital. Police say the second person who was shot was a teenager who walked into a hospital and was taken to a trauma center. The high school and a nearby school for kindergarten through grade 6 students were placed in lockdown, but they've since reopened. Police are looking for a suspect. The former chief of the Ottawa Police Force was on the hot seat today. Peter Slowly was cross-examined again at the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. And as Rafi Boudjikanian reports, he fought back against accusations of poor leadership and planning.
You were pretty concerned that you would lose your job and be blamed for what had happened.
Absolutely not, sir.
Former police chief Peter Slowly confronted by the lawyer representing the force he once led. His resignation weeks into the protest convoy that occupied downtown Ottawa, and his conduct up to that day, a big part of the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. Previous police witnesses have accused him of ignoring emailed reports warning about the danger posed by the protest.
I'm going to suggest to you, Mr. Slowly, that once you receive that email, this one here, you at some point decided that you could blame Deputy Chief Bell at the time for not planning for this event.
That is absolutely incorrect, sir, and I really take offense to that notion. Thank you.
The lawyer also accused Slowly of micromanagement and angry outbursts.
Deputy Chief Ferguson has in her notes that during the meeting on February 9th, you said twice that you will crush anyone who undermines the operation.
That was an inappropriate term at a very stressful meeting, but yes, sir. It was not said as a blanket statement that there could not be any operational, tactical, or even strategic changes.
Meanwhile, the lawyer for the Canadian government focused again on a key part of its thesis, how police were struggling to get tow trucks to play ball or even find them without the Emergencies Act.
At one point, there was an attempt to get the Ministry of Transport to assist with the tow truck issue. Do you recall that?
At one point, I think even Commissioner Lucky, I don't think she was flippant about it, but they were looking at Kijiji to find heavy tow trucks in Canada.
Today, Slowly also pushed back against the idea shutting down traffic to trucks would have prevented many problems.
Closing down our core, closing down our interprovincial bridges, for any reason, are hugely problematic, and they create a range of public safety and community wellness issues.
The inquiry also heard today that crisis management firm Navigator billed the Ottawa Police $186,000 for a communications strategy, and it was one of 2 such agencies on the public payroll during the crisis. The lawyer suggesting Slowly's concern about reputation predated his departure from the force. Rafi Boudjikanian on CBC News, Ottawa.
World leaders are congratulating Brazil's newly elected president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The leftist former president defeated incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in Sunday's extremely tight election. It's a stunning return to power for the 77-year-old da Silva, whose 2018 imprisonment over a corruption scandal sidelined him from that year's election, helping Bolsonaro rise to power. Lula is promising to govern beyond his leftist Workers' Party, saying he wants to restore the country's more prosperous past. The search is still underway for missing people in India after yesterday's devastating bridge collapse. More than 130 people are now confirmed dead. Salima Shivji shows us the aftermath and what's known about the people arrested today.
A night of celebration during India's most festive season quickly turned terrifying. New video of the moment that sent so many on the crowded bridge plunging into the river below, chilling to see. As was the frantic search to rescue survivors deep into the night and the following day.
The effort is on to trace the missing persons.
But that hope turned to anguish for many now grieving lost relatives. He didn't even tell me he was going there. This woman mourning her husband cries repeatedly. Those who survived are left with painful memories. Death was in front of us. We thought we'd be pulled into the river, Ashwin Mehra says, but we clung to what was left of the bridge. I couldn't really see the water, this man says, only people falling off the bridge around me. His friend didn't make it. Even with the efforts of locals who spent hours at the river's bank trying to rescue as many as they could.
I have seen so many small children who lost their lives.
J.D. Barra is haunted by what he saw.
It's heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. Can't imagine. Still that faces of the children are in my mind.
The bridge is 140 years old, but recently repaired, reopened just days before the collapse. The main question now is how. How is it allowed to reopen without, as a local city official claimed, the proper clearance? Indian police quickly arrested 9 people, including 2 managers of the company that renovated and operated the bridge, and filed culpable homicide charges against the company. Local police say more arrests are likely as the town tries to come to grips with the loss of so many so abruptly. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Vancouver.
South Korea is in a week of national mourning following a deadly stampede on Saturday when massive crowds at a Halloween street party surged and crushed those unable to escape. The CBC's Abby Kuavasan has more on the aftermath and the investigation.
There's been a memorial service for the victims of Saturday's tragedy. There was a steady stream of people who brought flowers, including white chrysanthemums, the flower of mourning in South Korea. Some bowed at the altar in a mark of respect for the 154 lives lost on Saturday. It's believed some 100,000 people were in the Itaewon district for Halloween festivities. People were especially crammed in a sloped alleyway near the main street. The alley is only about 4 meters wide. Witnesses say revelers began pushing to move ahead, and that's when people began to fall and get trampled on. One eyewitness says there was chaos.
I had to turn around and I told the crowd, you can't come this way. People are dying. Because I already knew how bad it was. And people were being so rude. And I had to tell them, you can't come this way. And then it took so long for emergency services to arrive.
Emergency services couldn't get into the district quickly because of the extremely large crowds. Most of the people out and about were teenagers and people in their 20s. Some were trying to do CPR and resuscitate their friends. For some, it was too late. The victims are mostly South Koreans. 26 foreign nationals also died. Global Affairs Canada says 1 Canadian was injured over the weekend. An investigation is underway. South Korean police have collected CCTV footage from dozens of cameras in the area. They've also been looking through social media videos and speaking to witnesses. But the government is facing criticism for a lack of crowd control on a busy Saturday night. The president, Yoon Suk-yeol, has pledged a thorough investigation and also promised to support families of the victims. Abby Kuavasan, CBC News, London.
Pressure is again building on Canada's medical system. The respiratory virus RSV is hitting earlier than usual. Add to that the flu and, of course, COVID. As Talia Ricci reports, healthcare workers are dreading the winter surge.
Good job, sweetie. You're all done.
We're getting our flu shot.
Families at a Toronto clinic are doing what they can to get ahead of peak flu season.
I'm an ECE, so I've always been working with lots of little kids, so it's something always really important I like to do just to make sure that I can get the extra protection.
But for many doctors, it's already been a busy fall.
Tons of respiratory viruses, tons of RSV, tons of COVID. We're not even close to what would normally be the winter surge in all these infections.
She was just sick a few days ago, so wanted to make sure she's protected and that other people are protected as well.
Healthcare demands are increasing across the country. Pediatric hospitals are under pressure as they deal with staff shortages and a surge of patients sick with what is known as respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV.
It's come a lot earlier than expected and with a lot more force. The viral load in the population is quite high.
That's ballooning emergency room wait times. At St. Justine Hospital in Montreal, in some cases, they've stretched to 24 hours, and it's only October.
The concern is, of course, as the growing pressure of the respiratory virus season continues to increase, we are going to see even higher wait times.
Healthcare workers are demanding solutions. In Manitoba, doctors recently warned in a report that more needs to be done immediately to attract more physicians. The province's health minister agreed to review the recommendations.
More healthcare funding will translate into better healthcare.
For now, Dr. Flanders recommends wearing masks in indoor public spaces, getting a COVID booster, and a flu shot.
It's been almost 3 years and everyone's burnt out, and we're just getting started this winter.
Doctors tell me they anticipate peak flu season will hit around January, and the big question is how hospitals already pushed to their limits will cope with that. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
Still with health, imagine reaching for a prescription drug bottle only to find you can't read the label. It's a challenge 1.5 million Canadians who are dealing with sight loss go through regularly. As Carolyn Dunn found out in this Go Public investigation, there is a solution, but not all pharmacies are offering it.
Dean Stacey has been blind for 17 years. Every day he takes insulin and up to 10 pills for diabetes and related conditions.
And then on this one, I have a top on it so I can tell the difference.
Taking the right meds is essential to his health. Getting them wrong, potentially dangerous.
I can go into shock, and diabetic shock or hypoglycemia.
Not being able to manage his own prescriptions, a blow to his independence.
It kind of takes away part of your dignity, and it's a hit on your ego.
For the past 5 years, Stacey has been lobbying his local drugstore, Rexall, to set him up with an easier system, talking prescriptions.
Ready to scan.
This sample product of Script Talk demonstrates the technology available in Canada since 2010. It uses a radio frequency chip on the bottom of the bottle.
Instructions: take 1 capsule 3 times daily.
Then it reads aloud the same information that's standard on all prescription labels. For years, Rexall told Stacey it was considering adopting the tech, and in 2018 even promised him a solution. But last June, it changed course, informing Script Talk it wouldn't be purchasing the system after all. Advocates say anything less than full access to talking prescriptions is discriminatory.
There is no reason why any drugstore, and especially a major established drugstore chain, isn't providing this on request on site without delay.
Currently, there's a patchwork of drugstores offering Script Talk in Canada. Some chains like Sobeys and Safeway are offering same-day, on-demand talking prescriptions now. Shoppers Drug Mart offers the service, but it takes up to 48 hours to fill. Same with Walmart, and only in BC. Loblaws doesn't offer it, but says planning is underway. After Go Public contacted Rexall, the drugstore apologized to Stacey, changed course again, and says it will offer talking prescriptions on a case-by-case basis. So Dean Stacey is anxiously waiting for that to include him. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
A BC city is hoping to become Canada's Halloween hotspot. After the break, we'll take you inside Burnaby's 5-year plan to attract tourists with Halloween festivities. And at 6:43, there's a live look at Georgia Street, mildly bustling. After a lot of rain, the sun appeared today. Kuljeet Kaila will have your spooktacular trick-or-treat weather forecast across BC right after this.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
When night falls this time of year, neighborhoods are filled with goblins, ghouls, skeletons, and witches, and whatever other costume a parent can get on their child. This Day of the Dead themed home won first prize for their intricate and elaborate decorations. Take a look. Burnaby Mayor Mike Hurley was one of the judges to choose it for a $1,000 prize.
Oh, they were overjoyed because they put so much work into telling their story from Chile, which is the country they're from, and speaking with the dead growing up. So they had a great theme to their setup, so I think that's what the judges liked. We had a marking system, and that's how this family here was chosen to be the winners, because of the great story they told, as well as the great work they put into decorating. Okay.
Burnaby is in the second of its 5-year plan to become Canada's #1 Halloween destination. The mayor was inspired by his own hometown of Derry, Ireland, which is Europe's favorite Halloween hotspot. Well, the focus has been largely family-oriented. Hurley says things will get a bit spookier in the future.
Based on what they did in Derry, and that's maybe a bit more a scariness to it than we're doing right now. Right now, we're really relating it to families, but I think we need to add in, some more real Halloween traditions of scariness and, just making people want to come and see the surprises that there may be in store for them.
Burnaby hosted 24 events this year, including a zombie walk, pumpkin carving, scary movie screenings, and creepy art installations. Hurley says every event they hosted is sold out so far. Next year, the city plans to partner with schools and the movie industry to turn Burnaby into Halloween Town. Kuljeet Kaila is back with our BC-wide weather forecast. We know kids are already out and about collecting the treats, as well as with their parents or guardians who are chasing them along. How's it going for them out there?
Not bad. We had a 40% chance of rain for this afternoon, evening. That has held off current conditions outside. Just some cloud coverage for the lower mainland. Really dry for most of the Metro Vancouver stretch, so that's good. That's one less thing parents have to worry about is the rain tonight, but do bundle up. It is quite cold out there. Rainfall accumulation for the rest of the week. We will be seeing Tuesday and Wednesday scattered showers here and there, but not too much. Just a trace of rain. It will come, though, on Thursday and Friday. Accumulations in the 20s and 40s for Vancouver, all the way out to the Fraser Valley. So be prepared for that. Tomorrow's forecast, still seeing sunshine, but low temperatures in the Caribou for Prince George and Williams Lake. Dees Lake sitting at -4 tomorrow, so getting quite cold up there. 2 degrees for Williams Lake, 7 in Kelowna, 9 in Victoria, and rain in Cranbrook and the Kootenays with 6 degrees tomorrow. Temperatures are dropping. It is starting to get colder across BC. Your extended forecast for the lower mainland, as I mentioned, this rain's going to come in on Thursday and stick around for Friday. Big accumulations by the end of the week. Then we get one dry day and then back to the rain again on Sunday. Monday, hopefully, will be dry as well.
Okay.
Dan?
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Kaila.
You're welcome.
We often associate them with blood and sucking and Batman. The city of Richmond thinks bats are getting a bad rap. We're going to take you inside the city's bat condo after the break.
So I also think that there's a conversation to be had.
Inside the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, residential school survivors, researchers, and academics are meeting to speak about the barriers they face as they continue searching for unmarked graves at residential schools.
I was just taken away from my father and two of my other sisters. And I was, struggling to get away from this man that was putting us into the truck.
Lorraine Pompana is an elder and residential school survivor from Sioux Valley Dakota Nation in southwestern Manitoba. She wants answers for the families whose children never came home. She says gatherings like this take them one step closer.
When I look back at it, I believe it was child apprehension, kidnapping. Those are the words that come to mind now.
Pompana's community has faced roadblocks, like access to archival records. Chief Jennifer Bone thought the community was alone. At the gathering, she found out many nations are coming against the same thing.
A lot of that just delays the work that's being done because we're spending time trying to access that information.
Catherine Nichols is part of the Dakota Nation's search for missing children. She says meeting people from across the country now will help their investigation later.
The Brandon Residential School recruited children from all over Canada, and so trying to identify the affected communities and the living family members is really essential.
Nichols said the connections here means researchers can share best practices, whether it's about getting archival information or access onto private land.
A lot of us are hopeful that in the next year or two, we'll see some real changes in Canada.
The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, who hosted the gathering, says searches may take up to decades, but survivors and researchers say the connections they've made will last much longer.
This is the beginning of nations across Canada working together to find answers. Joanne Roberts, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Celebrate Chinese Canadian music and entertainment at the Jade Music Festival, November 28th to December 3rd. View the schedule at jmfa.ca, and on December 7th, join Anita Bath and a panel of Indigenous business leaders at the Surrey Board of Trade's online Entrepreneur Showcase. Register for the free discussion today at businessinsurrey.com.
Many people see them as creepy, scary, and above all, as pests. But experts say bats are vital for much of what we eat. They've seen a lot at this time of year on Halloween decorations, but it also happens to be International Bat Week. It's a campaign meant to distill myths around the little winged creatures and protect their numbers. Here in BC, cities are jumping on board, and as Susanna De Silva reports, time is of the essence.
Well, hopefully we're going to see a little bit of guano.
Danielle Dagenet works as a crusader, minus the cape, to break through the mystery and dispel the myths around bats.
So it's a natural pest control. You know, as the bats go down, insects are going to go up, pesticides are going to go up, crops are going to be devastated.
A bat can eat 1,000 insects an hour on summer nights, just one of many reasons her group is working with cities like Richmond to protect them, one of a handful in BC designated as bat-friendly. It's set up a bat condo, a place for female bats to raise the one pup they have each year in the summer. Dagenet is checking to see if anyone has visited.
It's a slow process, but the objective is to get them in, and the more we get them in here and get them in a regular roost, then we can attract them to other parts of the city.
A stronger population may also mean better resistance to an approaching threat. White nose syndrome, a fungus that disturbs the sleep of hibernating bats, causing starvation and death. It has nearly wiped out some populations in eastern Canada, and it's making its way west. It's in neighboring Washington state and may already be here in BC.
We have so much to learn in honestly quite a short period of time.
BC has the widest variety of species in the country, but scientists say research on them is lacking because they are nocturnal and elusive, but also because of false myths around the amount of disease they spread, the potential for bites, and even fear about them perpetuated by Halloween.
In the West, we don't even know where they hibernate, so there's no way we're going to ever get into places to show you piles of dead bats. And so they're just kind of disappearing into crevices and maybe just not coming back out.
To help learn more, researchers are even dressing up poles as old-growth trees using a fake bark to provide more habitat for bats being forced out by development, and they double as places to study the world's only flying mammal.
Almost half of the baby bats that are born die every year.
Part of protecting them comes through education, like this impromptu lesson to an elementary class passing by.
Nobody seemed scared or hesitant. They all just seemed really interested. And it's those moments that it makes me feel like, you know, I'm doing a good job.
Wider knowledge of bats, plus some signs this condo may have had some tenants. A good day, Dagenet says, helping one of nature's most underappreciated species. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Richmond, BC.
Thank you for joining us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. A good reminder, if you're heading out to trick or treat, stay safe, stay visible, keep an eye on the kids, and if you're driving, please slow down. We're going to leave you tonight with a Halloween tribute to the late Queen Elizabeth II. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube, Instagram, and of course our website, cbc.ca/BC. Michelle Gassoub will have your next local news at 11 o'clock right after the National. Happy Halloween.